Hello again. This is the last week that we'll spend in the book of Ephesians for a while. It's almost like leaving an old friend, isn't it? We're going to begin here in Ephesians chapter 5, starting in verse 21. And this week we're going to go all the way through to the end of the book. Now, what Paul does at this point, he has advice, counsel, commands, in fact, that he gives to husbands and wives, then to parents and children, then to masters and slaves. In the first century, this was called the paranesis. It's the little topics, and frequently people, as they were writing letters, would send counsel, suggestions, especially if they were writing to a son, to a family member, about how to run their household. This happened frequently, and Paul picks up on that and says, well, the Lord speaks to that as well. So in chapter 5, verse 21, further, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. For wives, this means submit to your husbands as to the Lord. And he goes and he talks a little bit more about that. Then in verse 25, he says, for husbands, this means love your wives as Christ loved the church. And there again, he goes on and in some length develops how a husband should love his wife. Now, I don't want to get too far into the details. You've probably heard that quite a bit before. You can read through that. I wanted to focus here on the concept of mutual submission. What Paul is saying here is that a husband and wife should submit to each other. What in the world does that look like? We can understand a hierarchical arrangement where one submits to the other and the other has total command of the first. But Paul actually says, submit to each other. I think it's a little bit like 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verses 15 and 16. In that passage, it's interesting. Paul is talking about some of the leaders that he has sent to the church. Verse 15, you know that Stephanas and his household were the first of the harvest of believers in Greece. They're spending their lives in service to God's people. I urge you, dear brothers and sisters, submit to them and others like them who serve with such devotion. They are serving you, so submit to them. The idea of mutual submission stems from mutual service. Husbands and wives are to love each other, to do what they can to see each other flourish. As they do that, they submit to each other. Now, for whatever reason, Paul here says, wives, this means submit to your husband. Maybe they had a struggle with submitting, I don't know. Maybe husbands had a problem with serving and the wives didn't reciprocate with submission. So when he comes to the husbands, he says, husbands, love your wives. There again, service stems from love. In both cases, wife and husband, the model that they're to follow is Jesus. Wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. So we look to Jesus for the model of even how we are to live our married lives together. Mutual submission. What does it mean for you? That's something that I can't answer for you. But you and your spouse need to sit down together and talk about this. What does this mean? What can you do today to better love, serve, and submit to your spouse? Carry that with you today. I look forward to sharing with you tomorrow. We'll be talking about parents and children.